Welcome, John. Thank you for joining me today.
Hey, it's great to see you, Adam, and we've got something interesting to talk about today, I think, don't we?
Oh, we do indeed. We are talking
Yeah,
about fougeres today, and specifically fougeres that we kind of see as uncommon or otherwise notable.
yes, indeed. So, in thinking about that, and we were just speaking about this a little before, in order to break away from what might be considered, a common fougere, I think maybe we need to talk a little bit about what is a common fougere or sort of what defines fougeres generally. I'd love to hear a few points from you about this. What
Yeah.
you think a fougere is.
Well, I definitely consider myself more of a fougere person than a sheeper person in
Hmm.
general. Not hard and fast to that as a rule, but I definitely have experience with fougeres. So something that I always think about is like the different, subcategories of them. It doesn't really feel like there is one fougere. Any history nerd, any fragrance nerd is going to point out that, it derives from the French for fern, and that the original, quote unquote, the original intention of the fougere accord was to emulate, the fantasy smell of a fern, which, I think there's only a couple of species that give off any smell whatsoever, and the ones that do only give off such a very faint one.
Right.
So it's not as though we have a huge reference point for what a fern smells like, so much as we have a reference point for, forest greenery. And so in that respect, I think if you're going to look at fougeres as like the original intention behind them, uh, you think about, green scents, and that kind of, I think of it like that clovey spiced green. Like,
Hmm.
to me, that speaks to, historical fougeres. But when I actually think of a fougere, I think of something a little bit more aromatic, and maybe even a little creamy as well, which usually comes from a set of musks. But so when I think of a fougere, I think, does it have a lavender or clary sage or other herbal or agrestic element? That's
Hmm.
important. Uh, does it have a complex of musks, things that make it not only last, but things that give body and substance, and, maybe even a little cleanliness or creaminess or soapiness, depending on what, musks are used? Does it have a mossy, minerally, or otherwise damp, earthy kind of element to it? And does it have a coumarinic, sweetened woods or tonka element to it? And I think those are, to me, the key things that make a fougere a fougere. You can also throw in something citric at the top, something that's, especially in old school fougeres, you have that classic, top down structure of citric, herbal, and mossy cleanliness.
Hmm.
Um, but those are the defining characteristics that I think of. And of course, there's, even further, we can go further into defining what that means and the different subcategories of that. But how about you? What do you think of when you think of the fougere?
Yeah, you've actually done a great sort of breakdown of the sort of components, and also that the way that the the fern-like idea. And it's interesting that you brought it back to the actual fern, because I have a lot of kind of wild ferns that grow around my property here. And it is interesting how they grow in the shadows. Usually they're really lacy. They're very, I mean, you just looking at them, they look like they come from a very dark, weird, very old age of the planet, like way before we were here, right? And so there is something very fantastical about them. So I can see how, in the fact that so few of them actually have scent, that we've given to them a lot of, we've built fantasy around them. And uh, but in that, an interesting structure has emerged, which has those elements you mentioned, which is the very aromatic piece. That, to me, the one of the very key parts is that sort of coumarin sweetness, which usually comes from something like tonka bean, or we've found a number of different ways that sweetness can come in. So something like a note like hay, I find, is often really useful in making a great fougere. And clary sage is really key. There's a lot of great fougeres that use clary sage, because it really covers a lot of those bases of, being sweet, being aromatic, being a little bit, in the case of clary sage, just slight little bit of medicinal thrown in there too. So, um, and it's interesting to see how things like the citric elements can push, fougeres into this very fresh territory,
Mm.
or just give it kind of a bit of a sparkle. So yeah, I think that um, there's an aspect of the fougere that is, how can I say this? It's certainly, it when you smell it. It has a certain, there's a certain magic that happens when it all comes together, that you kind of feel. And this, I think a lot of people who have just smelled a few fougeres, they start to feel that combination of those four main elements, and they kind of recognize and say, ah, yeah, I know the structure of stuff, and they see it in other fragrances, and it's still here because it works so well. It's just really successful grouping of elements, and it's a great vertebra on which you can build off many different things.
Well, so that's sort of a blessing and a curse, right? It's a blessing for perfumers because,
Yeah.
if you are aiming to make that kind of fragrance, you have so many avenues. But it's sort of a curse for us in this discussion because, what we choose as our, interesting or otherwise notable or different quote unquote fougeres, to another person might not even come off as remotely fougere like, So it's going to be sort of an
Correct.
interesting excursion for us to talk about,
Yeah.
notable choices in the fougere category, fougeres that push the line of what a fougere is.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. So to the point of wondering if we'll get, some, will we get some flack for saying, that is not a fougere? But that's okay. But I thought what might be interesting to kind of start off, if I may, is to look at like a more classic fougere, just to get a notion of it. And one that I grabbed, which I think people are aware of, is of course the Fougere Royale by Obigant, which was brought back to life in 2000. Gosh, I don't know, but it was very exciting when it came back to life and was remade. And this is, pretty much considered the gold standard of, the fougere. And has all the stuff. It's got everything, all the tricks in the bag, basically, of a classic fougere. Beautifully aromatic and completely, sort of balanced out in terms of, you have just that hint of the citrus on top, and that wonderful aromatic center that just comes out immediately of, gosh, it's so nice. This is sort of my reference point personally of a fougere, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering, John, like, yeah, it's been a while since I've smelled Fougere Royale, but I have.
Mhm.
And, obviously as a fan of Fougeres, I enjoyed it. And so that was not a question. But I guess my wondering about it is that, can you smell in this quote unquote original Fougere, can you smell any inklings from which later perfumers derived other fashions? So we're talking the barbershop style. Do you smell anything remotely barbershop related in this? The style that's more, agrestic with the herbs, kind of like a Yatagan territory
Mhm. Mhm.
take on it. What do you smell in this original Fougere, the styles that kind of, originated from it or drew inspiration from it?
That's such a great question, and actually, I'm glad you asked it, because as I'm smelling here, the image that comes to my mind is like, if you were to take those sort of four aspects that you mentioned earlier, which are all here, the bit of citrus, the kind of foresty smell, the musks, the kind of aromatic center. I think even we've mentioned more than that, even like the coumarin aspect. All of that, if you were to sort of take a magnifying glass and sort of, put it against this sort of linear thing, you realize that those styles, each one of them kind of pulls out and exaggerates certain aspects of it. Because I was thinking of the barbershop style, and I realize now, smelling this, that, and let me grab like probably the most barbershoppy of all, but like, something like Proraso, which is, like, I mean, this, you can't possibly get more barbershoppy than this. And this is just, it's like a high contrast version of, I mean, that's a sublime, smooth, elegant thing. And gosh, Proraso is just like, electric, zing kind of, like bracing, mentholic, you know what I'm saying? It's like all that stuff, like, and yet it lives its life very short. It doesn't, it has its like huge burst like a firework, and then it just kind of dies out. So it doesn't have that sort of meandering apologies, meandering kind of life that something like Fougere Royale has. So I would say it's yeah, I wonder if something like the barbershop style always struck me as being a real exaggeration and high contrast version of the classic fougere. And then there's the whole world of the kind of much more experimental fougeres that, if you mention Yadigan, for example, from Caron, which delved completely into the notion of spices. And yet I wonder, that's a really interesting question about something like Yadigan. I mean, my brain still says, I think that would probably be a fougere.
I almost brought it, considering those notions. I'm saving it for another another kind of roundup, if you will, another
yeah.
thought process on categorization, focusing on the word agrestic, right? Because I mean, if we think about the word agrestic and what that means, I think Yadigan is probably the prime example in contemporary perfume. That being said, that brings up another point about the fougere, right? To me, it leans very masculine. It's always classically associated with masculinity, I think. Not that it's predestined to only be worn by those who identify with masculinity, but that it kind of has those associations kind of baked in. Oh, okay. Well, I think for those of us who, who watched the Pierre Guillaume roundup with me and Nicola, you might remember Finnegan.
Finnegan is our third guest who arrived a bit late, but
he likes fougeres, I'm sure.
That's awesome.
It reminds him of the other sativa plant that cats love so much. Hold on, I'll just be rid of him really quick. Oh God.
Great to have a guest appearance there. So.
Yeah, he's just a little cameo. No, I was just saying that, when we think about fougeres, we think about, masculinity, but we also think about the idea of cleanliness and body care. Obviously, when we talk about barbershop, that's a place that that people go to clean up and to be trim and cleaned in a way. And I think that there's this kind of contrast in the world of fougeres between those representing nature and actual ferns and outdoors and forest floors, which is untamed, unquote unquote clean, and then contrasted with the fougeres that skew very cleanly and soapy and barbershoppy, associations with non-outdoorsy things. So
really good point.
That's another way to think about fougeres too, in those, in that kind of dichotomic way. Is like, does it represent something that is outdoors and untamed and unkept, or does it represent something that is, indoors, if you will, or in a barber shop, in a medicine cabinet, in a way?
In the second case, it's interesting what you just mentioned about the sense of cleanliness, or I always found this connection between, and I was actually talking about this in a writing class that I did, where there's a connection between a very important component of fougeres, which is lavender, in a lot of them at least, and it being actually somewhat a medicinal, considered in some cases a very medicinal plant. It's often used to stop bugs from getting into things, right? And it's like, and I think that that's had an association as well too, is that it's more considered like kind of a pharmaceutical type of plant. Especially in Europe, I think it has more of that connotation than it does in the States, where it's seen more as sort of like a pretty smell. Whereas I think it has more of an association as a medicinal or pharmaceutical type of smell. So it melds more with this notion of, like you're saying, like something that you'd use to take care of yourself, which is more of that sort of the soapy barbershop type fougere smell. Right. Which I also love, it's a great, I have lots of very, very positive and happy associations with that smell.
And there is something about it too, that kind of brings me back to one of my main interests in fragrance, is this idea of, an accord that is hard to pin down, but definitely herbal, definitely spicy, but you're not always sure
Mm,
which herb or which spice it is. And I think fougères tend to
yeah.
do that
Right.
very well,
Yeah.
where, you know, many fougères, the lavender and clary sage are very prominent, and you can tell that they're there. But then there's something about it, another dimension, which, because of the addition of something coumarinic and something almost milky creamy, like in barbershop
Hmm.
takes, it feels like you can't quite pin down what herbs are going into this thing, and it makes you think of
Hmm.
like somebody sitting over a pot with a mortar and pestle right next to it, dumping assorted dried herbs and spices into a vat of some kind.
Right.
It's very alchemical in a way.
Right. No, I agree. And I do think there is this with the fougere, there is kind of like this magic moment when a certain amount of things are added together and they do create this, some magic happens and that you reach that fougere smell, which is a bit alchemical, because I think in the wrong doses it's not going to quite work. You're not going to get exactly that, again, that sort of zing that it hits that note. Otherwise they're still going to smell like separate elements. That's my thought on that.
So you've already brought up a couple of fougères today. Do you have another pick for something that's particularly noteworthy to you? Maybe a little off the beaten track?
Yeah, so something, this one is I care, I still keep this one in this box, although normally I get rid of them. So this one is going to be this one might be controversial, but let's give it a shot. So I'm going to say that this is the Yoji Yamamoto pour. I want to make sure I get this right, because this is the Om, and this is probably the version. I'm actually checking our Fragrantica website for dates, but this is the one that came out in 2013. All right. And what a lot of people talk about is its prominent note of licorice. And what I love so much about this is that it has exactly what you were talking about before. And just in case anybody wants to sort of see, this is the tall Yamamoto bottle here. Why I think this is a fougere and why it's an unusual fougere is pretty much exactly what you were just talking about, and that's what kind of spurred on my thoughts. Was it is that alchemical process of all the stuff kind of added together into a pot, and yet it still retains that classic aromatic, slightly sweet center. This does include clary sage, licorice, juniper. What is interesting too, there's patchouli and musk in the base, as doesn't necessarily have a direct coumarin. It could be in here, but that inclusion of clary sage and licorice and a bit of cardamom, and I think that those interesting spices together take this off in a different direction, and yet it is not so far away from Fougere Royale. Like, they actually both have that green, foresty, slightly damp. Wow, I forgot how good this is. Just smelling this now, this is such a beautiful fragrance.
I've always been curious about this, although
Yeah.
frankly a little hard to find, right?
Yeah, this bottle I actually bought when I was in London, and I think you can get it. I think you can get these online, but they're very strange about their releases. Like, they'll put things out and then suddenly it's unavailable for years. And this was re-released after people were talking for a long time about it, saying how wonderful it was. And some people say this isn't nearly as good as the original was. I
Well, we
think it's
hear
still
those types of discussions very often here in the community, don't we?
we do, yes, of course. And it's rare that they'll say, oh, this is so much better than the original. Right? So,
I do want to call out Making a Stink, the YouTube channel. They do a really interesting series now and then where they will find a vintage bottle
uh-huh.
and find a contemporary bottle of the same release, the different quote unquote
Oh,
versions.
yeah, that's
And
right.
what they found often is that the differences between batches of in vintages is
Mhm.
so little that it hardly feels worth it to spend the extra money to find you know the treasure bottle that you've been looking for. And I wonder if the same is
Yeah,
true of
yeah.
this, but maybe we'll never know personally. uh, and maybe somebody who's watching has an opinion on that they're willing to share.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, absolutely. What I do think is good about this too is it's also what I like about this is they didn't sort of over engineer this. This is actually still a very light fragrance, really wearable. I mean, people hear the word licorice too and they get like freaked out, and it's a bit but to me this sort of adds to the how can I say this, a bit of the that kind of ethos of the more experimental fougere, and that it's very ghostly. Like it'll be there for a few hours and then it kind of very slowly dissipates, and it was like, what was that strange thing that visited me, like that, that kind of from the forest floor, that's sort of an idea. So it's a great fragrance, and I think it definitely stretched the notion of the fougere in new directions, if you will. So having said that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you have for us?
I have a few, and this is
Yeah.
probably no surprise to somebody who follows contemporary fougeres. We were talking before about the idea that fougeres kind of represent in different ways, either cleanly, kept indoor environments versus the outdoor environments. And what's interesting about my first pick, I think, is that it kind of brings both into the equation, at least in the
Mhm.
marketing. It definitely does. It's
Mhm.
called Burning Barbershop by DS and Durga. And
Right.
it's really interesting to me because the story, if you will, behind it is that
Mhm.
there was a barber shop of some kind, or maybe it was supposed to be more than just a barber shop, that burnt down, and a bottle of some kind of tonic, some aftershave of some kind, was found in the rubble,
Mhm.
kind of burnt to a crisp. I don't know how true the story is. I'm sure it's based off of some kind of local legend, but
Mhm.
uh, it does communicate that concept well in the fragrance, insofar as there's a smoky element, there's an ambered quality,
Mhm.
and then there's the mix of herbs that you would expect from something like this. And I get like a very spearmint quality from the top,
Mhm.
along with a really like muddled lime effect. And the way that those qualities interact with smoke in this is very interesting. You have something like eucalyptus and mint qualities that don't normally get paired with something heavier.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And the result is pretty magical. It does have that kind of alchemical quality to it where, it comes across as a whole new smell in many respects. Um, really enjoy burning barbershop.
Yeah, I was going to say, how does I'm curious because I haven't smelled this, and I'm thinking about the the notion of those almost like searing, like things like that mint and eucalyptus, which are really, in my mind are bright but almost a little searing, along with something like smoke. And how does that work in a way? Like, I'm just kind of, what's that experience like? Because that they sound so discordant to each other or something. But
Well,
do they mix? Does it kind of alternate, or is it more of a does it do you first sort of smell those top notes of the mint and eucalyptus, and then does it eventually bring in sort of a
well, you know how when you think of smoke, you think of a very intense, hard to parse, dense smell.
right?
And I think that the addition of these bright, citrus and herbal notes makes it more like you're smelling wisps of smoke at a time. They do blend together very seamlessly, and I don't
Okay.
think it's one of those fragrances where it kind of goes back and forth, where you smell different
Mhm.
parts of it. I think it's more of a fragrance where uh, everything kind of blends seamlessly,
Mm.
in my opinion.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I think the ultimate experience of it for me is that, if you can imagine what the top notes of smoke might smell like, this is a
Yeah.
representation of that.
Okay.
Um,
Sometimes smoke can have almost like a slightly citrusy, you know, yeah, like little tendrils of something like kind of citrusy and air, and not aromatic, but like aerated, or like I'm losing words here, but like, like when the air is also coming through, almost like ozone mixed with citrus and things like that.
I
In my
guess the
mind.
word for it is chrysolic. Yeah.
Yeah. That is the word. Yes. Thank you.
It kind of it kind of reminds me of Mary Poppins when they're in the chimney and then the chimney sweeps come out and dance on a roof. Uh,
Yes.
I feel like that is the perfect Perfect analogy to bring up working
There was
barbers.
something like kind of like like there's a prize or like a major thing kind of bleeping on the screen because like, how many times in your life are you going to say, it's like Mary Poppins? That's a really rare event in life, I mean,
Especially in the fragrance discussion circle. Yeah,
yeah,
I think
right,
so. But
exactly.
well, the fact that
Awesome.
the chimney sweeps in
Jiminy
that movie
sweeps,
are
yes,
all
yes.
like covered up in ash and stuff.
Yes,
And
right.
it's
Sooty, I think might be
they're
the word.
sooty,
Yes,
yes, and
yes.
that's a better term. I don't feel like I need to put on a really horrendous British accent in order to wear this.
Yeah.
Dias and Durga, they something that is sort of notable about them is that they aim to make very American smells, very North American
Right.
scenery and imagery in their work. That said, though, I did have to bring up that wacky little comparison.
It's
Yeah, there's
great.
something
It's a
kind of
great one though.
lightly ash about it, and that's something very interesting in and of itself is that you don't really see fougeres paired with anything too dark and heavy like that very often.
Yeah. Yeah. Which that's why that's a great example to bring up because I don't often see that. But that's again another kind of interesting detour that expands or explores avenues that still keep that kind of fougere idea intact, if you will. Yeah. That's a really cool one.
Sort of at the heart of the discussion, I think, here today. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
How about you? What's your next pick?
Okay, giving a little look here. So this might be considered a little bit. I mean, you and I have talked about this one before. This is from Parfum d'Empire, and this is the old school bottle, and this is Fougere Bengal, which is a very dark fougere and a very sweet one. But what's so interesting about it is, I remember at first when I smelled this, and this people will say, oh yeah, that was back when they did their bottles differently. I actually do kind of like their new style bottles, which are slightly different typeface, but this is the house that also brought us Musk Tonkin and goodness, yeah, a lot of really classic great fragrances. The iris there's an iris perfume they've made which is a stunner. Yeah. What is interesting, I mean, they kind of had the audacity to put fougere in the name, so they're clearly pointing out that it's a fougere. It has a bit of everything in here. I think there's dates is one of the notes on this,
and they do date notes very well.
Yeah, extremely. And I actually will probably just sort of look this up for note references because I don't recall, but I believe that there's like time maybe in here. But the point is, just generally speaking, it's a very yeah, I'm just giving you a quick look here. No, I was wrong on that. There isn't a time in there. I'm thinking of another fragrance here, but the note here that is really different from most fougeres, that stands out the most, is that there's tea leaves, and it's a very black kind of tea. It's very and very prominent, and there's that kind of sweetness to it, and it has the rest of the stuff. There's hay, there's lavender. They kind of twist a little bit by putting some oak moss in there, which is definitely brings up that idea of the kind of foresty kind of aspect to it too. But it is very dark, and yet somehow within it you still get that notion of the fougere. In a way, this is going to sound very funny. It's almost like kind of a more, it would be something like a fougere royale that had been left to like cook longer on the stove a bit, to like reduce it by half, to make a thicker sauce in a sense, and then throw in a little bit of tobacco and some pepper and some tea leaves and let it brew a long time, and then you got yourself
why is this making me hungry? Like, why am I hungry now? This is so wrong.
And then you pour it over the pasta, and then you've got yourself and the other thing whenever I wear this, and I have to say too, I've had this for a few years, and gosh, I haven't even really I've only used maybe about 20% of the bottle, and I've used it a lot. it's heavy, it's potent stuff, but it does, as it wears on your skin by the end of the day, as I recall, it starts to kind of reveal more of its like basic structure of, you can distinctly smell lavender, that the coumarin that comes along with the hay, and that bit of musk at the bottom, and it's sort of like, what's the best metaphor I can use here? It's kind of like a lion that's roaring a lot in the beginning, and then finally it's kind of like going to sleep at the end, So great, I give them a lot of credit for trying to experiment a lot with this notion of the fougere, and actually sort of, and even taking it out of the kind of European notion of it, and making it more like by putting the sort of tea and different things. And I feel like it's almost making it a little bit more Asiatic, or sort of like Southeast Asia kind of notion of what a fougere might be. Yeah, it's a really, really interesting fragrance for people who like fougeres.
Now, you were talking earlier about the importance of clary sage to the fougere genre.
Yeah, I think it can be pretty important.
I wanted to bring up a perfume that I think really stresses the clary sage note above all others, really.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be Parfums de Cita's Erewhon.
Oh, yes.
Now, when we think
Yes.
about fougeres and Parfums de Cita, I think many people might be quick to bring up Isara. And I guess I would consider that a fougere too. But I consider Erewhon more of an example, a better example of a fougere, just because with Isara, that's a study to me in coumarin and
Agree
hay
with
and
you.
coumarinic smells.
Right, agree with you on that one. Yeah,
it's such a singular study of that note, though, that I think of it more as a coumarin fragrance, really, almost like I don't want to distill it too much, but why can't I think of this very popular fragrance brand that does single notes, and one of them is ISOE Super, that kind of thing.
Oh, eccentric molecules.
Eccentric molecules.
Yeah, they're right.
Erewhon, Isara by Ducita kind of makes me think of like if that brand did a study in coumarin, because it very much is like a study in just that note. But
Right.
To me, Erewhon kind of expands on that coumarinic forward fragrance idea, and adds in the clary sage, adds in something called Liatrix Absolute, which is, for those unaware, it's like a tobacco hay crossover material that smells very aggressive to me. And it's another masculine leaning fragrance to me, and in a way that I cannot quite place. It's like the driest fougere I've ever smelled. It's very intensely focused on that like sun-baked hay and subtle vanilla kind of quality that I think any fougere fan would want to check out.
Isn't there's something in that too, that Erewhon that has a how would you describe it exactly? It's like it's the use of hay that I haven't, because it's a great fragrance, and I have it as well, and I love it. And there's something about the use of hay that I haven't quite found in any other fragrance. Like you said, sun-baked. There's also something that it's like, it's going to sound weird, but it's like there's moss growing on it or something, like it's very intense. It's like distilled. It's a tough one. It's a tough one to describe, because it's so unusual. It's such an unusual, yeah. It's a beautiful fragrance, and when you mentioned about dry, it is extremely dry, but in the best sort of way, like in a yeah, it's a great choice, and I agree. It's definitely not trying to be everything in a fougere, I think is a thought I had about it too. Like it's focusing far more on the green part, and the green and sweetness of, but in that very particularly dry way, which is, yeah,
it doesn't
fascinating.
have any top note or sparkle to my nose, really. Nothing bergamot related at all.
Yeah, no, I agree. It kind of just goes straight into it. Yeah, which is like unapologetically, yeah, which is really, really cool. I agree on that one.
To
Yeah.
kind of play off of that contrast that we talked about earlier, though, it definitely is a weird scent insofar as so many parts about it seem very aggressive and very outdoor related. Like definitely
Mhm.
that imagery of like that hay that's sat all day in the sun kind
Mhm.
of thing, which is a very countryside imagery, if you ask me. But there's something about it that makes me want to wear it to a special occasion where I'm dressed up.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
just what I experience from it, but definitely a very interesting perfume insofar as what is in the bottle is very aggressive versus what it makes me want to wear it to is very not aggressive.
That's an
I wouldn't want to go
interesting.
outside on a apple picking wearing this. I want to, you know, make a reason to wear it.
Actually, that's a pretty wild. That, and that in itself is a great topic, right? It's like what something smells like, and yet compared to how we would wear it, because I've noted there are some things that there's a big difference between the two. That's a great yeah, it has a sophistication, doesn't it? A kind of a certain, yeah, like I don't know, I would stand up a little straighter when I was wearing that. I think I wouldn't slouch.
Absolutely. And well, that's definitely something that I think makes
Yeah.
a fougere as well. I think there's this association
Yeah.
with fougeres that
Yeah.
even the more aggressive outdoor fern related ones, I think there's something about them that you kind of want to wear to an office environment. You kind of want to
Yeah.
wear a fougere to a semi-formal or formal occasion,
Right.
and or you might want to wear it to a
It's a
barber
good
shop, I
point.
guess. But the thing is that if you go to a barber shop, there's something even a little bit formal about that. It's going to a barber shop, especially as a man,
Yeah.
you go there to be around those who have a similar mindset of like, I want to
Right.
go in here for a pragmatic purpose and have a
Right.
professional do a very good job
Yeah, right. So it's a bit
efficiently.
ritualistic. It's a bit, yeah, right. So it's not just, no, you're right. Yeah, I hear you on all those accounts. Yeah. It's got its own it's a slightly formal process,
Yeah.
in that sense, right? That's a pretty wild idea. I like that.
How about you? Do you have another choice for
I
another pick?
do. I do have a couple more. And this one I actually feel pretty good about. And this was I decided to branch out a bit, and I wanted to look at some more recent. I thought, what are some new things that have been coming out, and something that represented a fougere, and something that I found interesting. And I was really, really surprised by this one. This is new. This is Tom Ford's Costa Azura. This was out this year. And I was really, really surprised to find that this is truly a fougere, which I had not expected. I kind of thought this was, yeah, I'm really looking forward to you having a smell at this one. And
I haven't spent much
what's
time with it, so I'd be very curious too.
yeah, yeah, it is such a curious and weird fougere, and it's because I think the biggest weirdness of it is that it has a couple of sort of top notes that are so unusual. In particular, there's a note of seaweed and celery seeds, and so right off it's just pure, like, weirdly watery aromatic, like kind of algae aromatic, right?
Yeah.
Just underneath that, there's that lavender. There's some cypress. The lavender's there. The thing it doesn't have, which is interesting, is it doesn't really have sort of the coumarin or hay or tonka bean type of thing, but instead it has like a little bit of vanilla and some wood. So it becomes more of a study in like this sort of driftwood, if you will. It's a weird take on a fougere, again, which is what we're doing today, right? So
Perfectly
um,
chosen there. Yeah.
and I think for Tom Ford, it interests me because I kind of have some associations of Tom Ford being really opulent. A lot of his fragrances are very sweet, very opulent, very or they're overly, like, kind of slick, and like that they're very kind of, I don't know, they have that sheen to them, sort of. And this could easily be like an indie house. I could see Kerosene putting out something like this, or it's got that very almost like I haven't actually worn this on my skin yet. I've just been spraying it on strips, and I'm going to put some on now.
Look at you
Gosh darn
go.
it. Yeah, I
Okay.
know. I'm
Well,
just going
gosh
to do
darn it.
it.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do it.
Really let loose,
Oh,
John.
yeah, I know, right? So you've all seen it here, folks. I've put it on my skin.
A fragrance writer, a fragrance producer is wearing a fragrance.
No, it smells great on skin. It actually it's even more yeah, this smells fantastic on
Oh, and
skin.
you chose the
It's
good arm too to put it on, the
yes,
decorated
the
arm.
decorated arm, yes. The illustrated arm. No, it really, it actually melds really nicely with skin. It's got this that kind of aquatic-y stuff in there. Just dissipates so nicely, kind of like seawater after you've been swimming in the ocean or something like that. So, for all the hoo-ha of saying Costa Azura, it actually is pretty coastal.
Well, so okay, that's
you know,
interesting too, because
you know,
I grew up in one of the most seaside, beachy kind of environments in New
yes,
England you could
that
imagine.
is you. Yeah, that is totally you. Yeah, you
But
did.
I don't often go to the beach. And one of the reasons is that, I love everything that happens at the beach until you want to pack up. Packing up at the beach
Yeah,
feels like such a chore. It really
yeah,
drains me. I
yeah.
love being in the sun. I do enjoy swimming. I like, you
Yeah,
know,
you're very much a summer guy. You are. Yeah.
I am.
You're,
I like the
yeah,
heat, really, is what I like.
yeah.
I just don't like being
Right.
cold. Uh, and I really like, checking out all the pools, the little vernal pools, etc. What I hate is like the sensation of being extremely sandy and then going into a car, because to me they're two completely different environments. Being
Yeah.
outside, being in the sand is like enjoying the outdoors for what it has to offer. The sea has always been there and we're going out, we're enjoying it. And then to go into a car after you're sandy and damp and going home, and it feels so downer to me. Like it's a really it's a very strange occurrence where I feel awful doing it.
Can I throw an idea in there at you, which hey, you have your experiences, and I don't want you to feel like to disown those, but I sort of have a slight. I know what you mean. There's sort of something a bit depressing, especially if it's a Sunday, and then it's like,
Oh
oh
God,
man,
yeah, that's the worst
then
day to do that. Yeah.
yeah, and then it's like, oh man, work. So you start thinking about work and everything, but I've noticed though there's a nice sensation if you're dry, like if you've managed to change into new clothes and you're like, if you've got wet things on, that is horrible. But if you are kind of starting to dry, and if you're going to dinner or something afterwards, like if you have like if it's just to go home, that's a killer. But if you have, and you're kind of like driving along and you're maybe going to have some, I don't know, something a bit like more aquatic, like in your case being vegetarian, I don't know if it'd be sort of like a seaweed salad or something, but I mean, there's something kind of like, I like rounding out the day with something that's very beachy, which actually brings me to something kind of fragrance related, where I really love that it's not quite a fougere type of thing, but gosh, maybe we were creating a need here, which is I love some of the associated smells of like, suntan lotion and that stuff, but that combined with like that residual scent of like skin drying from the salt water. And I mean, I love some of those smells. I really do.
Well, you just gave me the perfect transition. Before we get
Oh,
to it though, I just want to
nice.
say maybe
Nice.
Costa Azura would bring me there and kind of be a
It's
nice go between
it's
for
pretty
me
nice.
to meld the process and to make it
Yeah,
work.
I think it could do it. But let's I love that this kind of opened the door here.
Well,
Let's
and I'm sorry I have to give another kind of preface here. So I don't want for those of you watching who also saw my recent video with Nicola on Pierre Guillaume, I don't want to make it seem like I'm a Pierre Guillaume shill, but there are two, like when we think about offbeat fougères, I cannot help
Mm,
but mention uh I'll quickly mention one, which is Cosé. Uh,
okay.
I see Cosé as a fougère because of how it makes me feel. It
Mm,
does have some notes in common with a fougère insofar as it's very green, it's very agrestic, and it has that kind of a sweetened base that I think kind of skews it into fougère territory. But honestly, it just makes me feel very handsome. That's the word I think of when I think of Cosé.
interesting. I was just giving it a quick look here. Yeah.
It has some slight powdery qualities, like many
Uh-huh.
fougeres do. Has
Right.
that, bright greenness that kind of, for those of you who know about rose and rose accords, it has that like uh, metallic kind of quality that some rose accords have, but it's
Mhm.
skewing in the green, not floral direction at all.
Mhm.
And it just has like a very classic men's product smell to me that I cannot dissociate from it. So
Mhm.
I wanted to mention it quickly there because I do see it as a fougere, and I treat it in my mind as a fougere. So I had to bring it up.
Yeah.
But the Pierre Guillaume fragrance that I would think is most fougere like is Guanafrage, which is a relatively new fragrance to me.
Mhm.
But Nicola in our Pierre Guillaume episode talked about it from the sense of it being like a really salty skin, your skin but better kind of fragrance.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that there's the connection. We
Yeah.
got to it
Yeah.
eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
I don't want to talk too much about Pierre Guillaume because I don't want people thinking that I'm just a shill. But
No, it's totally fine.
something that I think is interesting is, we're talking about all these different takes on a fougere, but lighted on fire in the form of that Dias and Durga fragrance. A fougere,
Mhm.
but go to the seaside with it, like Costa Azura. Uh,
Mhm.
this is the fougere, but in that your skin but better subcategory of fragrances, which are picking up in popularity these days.
Mhm.
But Blanc de Page has been around for years, and I think Pierre Guillaume did that before Juliet Has a Gun did their Your Skin But Better series. So,
Right. Right.
in many respects, I see Bois Naufrage as like a very ahead of its time perfume. But it's that
What
light. Yeah,
and
sorry, go
what,
ahead.
sorry to interrupt you. No, I was going to say, and what do you think does it from like more of a technical point of view? Like, what is there a particular ingredient or note in there that, or notes that are that push that notion further, or
Yeah,
uh,
I mean, in many respects, I think you could see Bois Naufrage as like a fougere in disguise. But I think when you think about that light powderiness that kind of gives fougeres their grooming product sensation, uh, plus that kind of friendly sandalwood accord that you do see in many contemporary fougeres that are
Mhm.
usually a bit sweeter than this one is.
Right.
Um, there's that musky element. There's like a complex of musks in this perfume. I mean, it kind of to give off that salty skin feeling, it kind of has to rely on many different types of musks and some,
Yeah.
alterations therein. But definitely Ambroxan heavy as well.
Sure.
Um, a minerally quality that is supposed to represent salty skin that's been sitting at the beach all day long. But I think of it, what is mineralic also is oak moss, right? Oak
Yeah.
moss has that minerally kind of salty like quality to it as well,
Yeah. It can definitely
umami, if
kind
you
of,
will.
yeah. And to my mind, it always can like, how is it like, it can take that sort of mineral smell and it just adds sort of a roundness to it, or full, makes it fuller or something. I don't know quite. Yeah. If that makes sense, but it,
Right.
or gives it more depth or something. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't really think it has. I think that the one quality it's missing is the highly aromatic, like herbal
Mhm.
quality. But it does have a fig and a vetiver note, and both of those, fig and vetiver accords
Mm,
do tend to have something, not only vegetal, not only fruity, but something, grassy and herbaceous about them.
yeah, absolutely. That
So
sounds
I think it
fascinating.
qualifies, really. I think it barely
Yeah,
qualifies, but I think it qualifies. I
but hey,
definitely treat it like
that's
a fougere.
and that's okay. We're pushing boundaries here, a little. So that's all right.
We're making waves.
That's right. We are.
What would be your
Uh,
next choice, John?
So I wanted to sort of stretch a bit and look also at some new things. And I was thinking this is interesting because this isn't really a category I think we've discussed yet, which is good because I like how we're moving here. But Elena brought up a fragrance which I recently, when she and I were talking, and I had just smelled it in passing, and I thought, oh, it's kind of interesting, but I really wanted to smell it a little better. And this is actually a little bit more mainstream, but this is good stuff. This is the new Dolce and Gabbana, one of the new light blue, and this is the one called Light Blue Forever. There's how many of these now, right? It's like, and I like the fact that it's called Forever, like this, almost as if it's like get rid of all the other light blues. This is forever. I mean, it's a pretty bold statement, I guess, is what I'm saying
Well,
here.
I don't want to sound too harsh, but if you're saying this one is good, then you could get rid of all the other light blues, and I would be happy because I haven't
Yes,
smelled one that I like yet.
Well, I think you would actually find this one pretty interesting. If anything, it's just, and this is the fougere that goes pure citrus. And this is just the most grapefruit of all grapefruits that you've ever smelled in your life. Which, so someone could say, well, that's just sort of a citrus fragrance, but it's actually not. What I find so interesting, aside from it just being almost like pure grapefruit, nothing but grapefruit, which the other light blues, to be frank, which I find a couple of them slightly interesting, but never enough to go on and on about, and I've never really written about them, but I could and will probably write something about this one. Light blue forever. Hard to forget that name. What was that one you were talking about, John? Light blue sometimes, light blue occasionally. No, light blue forever. That's
Dingus. Like,
exactly.
It's almost like marketing went on to autopilot there. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I'm sorry, Dolce & Gabbana's never gonna send us anything. They're never gonna want us to talk about a thing that they do from here on out. We're sorry, D&G.
No, but in here though, I am praising this very highly. So, and actually what's funny is I just quickly typed in the word forever into Fragrantica, and there's a lot of perfumes that have the word forever in them.
But we digress.
Yeah, but I digress. Dolce, but I do want to take a look at, here we go. And by the way, this is distinctly, it's marketed as Pour Homme, because I'm sure there'll be a forever Pour Femme probably. But so what is interesting, I just wanted to have a quick look at these notes. So there is, it does sort of just barely get into our, not that I sort of just associate notes with the profound, say, oh, that makes it a fougere, but I am sort of curious as to what, the backbone of this stuff is. And it has a musk, which you can definitely smell. The thing that kind of takes in the aromatic part, once some of this grapefruit dies down, is a violet leaf, which is definitely there, and it mixes with the other thing. It has like a bit of vetiver and a bit of patchouli. So there's no sweetness in this. So it's really just pure grape, like mega blast of grapefruit. And then it goes straight into this bit of violet, but it's really like that very green violet leaf, and then down into this musk, and you can start to smell some of that musk. So it's actually a very stripped down, which again is interesting for something like, Dolce & Gabbana, because these things tend to be a little more, I think overall balanced to kind of, they're a little more mainstream. They want to please a lot of different people. This is I'm not thinking of the right words here, but it's sort of like a minimalist rendering of some of the basic concepts. And in that sense, this sort of citrus minimal fougere is an interesting idea. And I like it. I don't encounter a lot of very citrus forward fougeres that I would still call fougeres,
Right.
And I would say that this one works. This is pretty successful.
So we're really covering all areas of the fougere realm here. That's really interesting. I guess, I'll give this a shot. Lord knows I shouldn't have any trouble finding it. Right?
No, that's true. It's pretty accessible. Definitely available at Sephora. I would say, if anything, give it a test and smell. And if one likes the smell of grapefruit, you got plenty of, this would be your go-to grapefruit, I think, right. If anything. So,
well,
what about you? I'd like to, if you have some more or something else you'd like to talk about.
I have two more.
Yeah. Oh, great. Cool.
Speaking of newer perfumes, I think about something I just experienced in a store, believe it or not, for the first time in quite some time.
Yeah, it's been a while for us.
The Chanel Riviera series just dropped a new one called Paris-Edinburgh. I'm just going to refer to it as Edinburgh from here on out. I'm not going to do it the French way. I'm sorry, Chanel. So this is a fragrance that, thinking about Scotland, thinking about, cooler temperatures and tweed jackets, all that kind of thing. This is an aromatic fougere in its purest sense. So the star note, I think, is juniper berry, which, for those who are familiar with the note, it's very cool. It's a very icy kind of a note.
Mm.
And they also do a good job pairing citrus with this perfume. It's a very almost aldehydic citrus with, you know, airy notes and juniper, and of course it's going to smell good. You know, if you
Mm.
appreciate, you know, the aromatic slash outdoorsy agrestic fern smell of Fougeres, you're going to enjoy this. Um, the dry down is very fern fougere again, and it
Mhm.
is familiar, like that kind of spicy greenness that you associate with, you know, a vine that you tear, you know, or
Yeah.
it's a very light, hard to place kind of smell. But when you smell it, you know it. It's this kind of uh, I don't know how to describe it, a bruised plant, right?
Yeah. That's actually a good way to put it. Where you're getting almost like a is it sort of like a very controlled, softly wafting kind of, sense of the greenery or something. I know. Like if I've been chopping some plants out in the back, or there's a certain smell that comes from like hacking the hedges or something like that. Which that kind of sounds a little bit like what you're talking about.
Yeah, it is that way, but very subtle, and also combined with that uh, familiar masculine accord. You know, dihydromercenol is probably used in great abundance.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's very enjoyable. It's a little predictable, but
Mhm.
in a way that is, you know, well rendered. I mean, you would expect nothing less from a house like Chanel that has that legacy to hold up.
Sure.
The only thing about these Riviera series fragrances is that I find, you know, sampling them in a store very enjoyable, and I think they're very pretty.
Mhm.
Um, they're very easy to wear, but I also find myself disappointed in their performance, and that's not something I usually care about. I really don't.
Yeah. These are
But
extremely light. Yeah, I have
they're
one
very
of them. Yeah, I have one which is it's because it's so light, it's sort of become just sort of a very functional after shower, kind of. I use it in the morning and then I'll put on something else usually during the day. Which I kind of wondered if that's a bit of just the way that they function. Like it's, they're meant to be just, I don't know, like more like a body spray almost, which dare I say, kind of a, uh, you know,
well, we got
something.
D&G mad at us. Now we're gonna get Chanel on our case too.
Right.
Well, no, I agree. It is sort of like a body spray, and I hate to say that.
Yeah.
I yeah, again, I kind of roll my eyes when I hear people complaining about perfume performance
Yeah,
because it's
I'm
just,
with you. Yeah.
you know, half the time they're applying way too much and they're going nose blind to it, and they think that's the perfume's fault when it's theirs.
Right.
And then the other half of the time, it's just, I mean, get a sense of perspective, right? I know that perfumes cost money. All perfumes are a luxury product, and I
Right.
get that you want it to do what you want it to do. But
Sure.
if you have any knowledge at all about how fragrances work and what they're made out of, you'll know that not everything is designed to smell like that, and it can't be. It just simply cannot sometimes.
Right. Yeah, especially certain types of fragrances. They're just not that the actual way they're structured. There's just no way that those kinds of notes can last as long as something like, an amber, which is all pretty much base notes, and it's gonna, they're big molecules. They evaporate really slowly. They have big punch to them. So, they will, of course, have a big impact. At least some of them will have a very long, sustained impact, as opposed to, these sort of middle notes, like Clary Sage doesn't really have a terribly long impact. I mean, it's a beautiful note, but it's not like this, in your face kind of,
And where it does
note. Yeah.
last, it grows soft when it, you know, dries down. So
Yeah.
it's hard. And so
Yeah.
Edinburgh from Chanel, it's not something that you can expect to last very long. That being said, I
Mm-hmm.
would really love it. And I don't think that it'll ever happen. I would really love it to be in higher concentration. I'd love to see a EDP or a parfum version of this. I really don't see them ever bothering to do that because I think the purpose of this line is to be very light.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do wonder, man, if only I could get like a few mil of like the concentrated pure parfum version of it, and then just
Yeah.
dilute it myself to my liking. That would be really great. I'd love to see a 20% dilution version of this
Yeah.
because it'd be, I think it would be a different experience, and I would like
You've
that.
You've made me really curious about this one in particular, though, because I have liked, I remember smelling, I was actually at an airport smelling, I think when the initial three came out, and I think it was the Riviera. I think, well, wait, I can't remember which one I got. I think, but yeah, I think it was that one that I bought, which I really liked. But I thought I did think they were all interesting concepts, and they do have a certain, what's the word I want to use here? They all have a certain organic quality to them that was kind of interesting. You know, they felt a little bit closer to quote unquote sort of natural elements, if you will,
Mhm.
which, you know, less fantasy and more kind of I don't know. So like when you mentioned like the juniper note and stuff, that sounds fitting in with the theme of this a little bit, you know. But I agree with you on all those points though. But I want to smell it because I've kind of been following that line a little bit, you know. And
It's
it's
worthy
interesting.
of experiencing, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
maybe I just need to, apply more than the single shot to my wrist that I've experienced thus far. Maybe if I actually had a bottle of it and sprayed it in more excess, it might be
They do
more
come in some
successful.
pretty substantial size bottles too, if I remember. Like,
They
yeah.
are, they
So
are, and they're not the most expensive of the Chanels. So,
right, yeah,
um, anyway, so
yeah.
I definitely have one more fragrance to go through, and I kind of want to save it for last, if that's okay, for reasons that will
Yeah.
soon become clear.
Oh, okay. Interesting. All
Um,
right. So I may do, so let me possibly do one more and then do you
do you
want to do
have do
one
you
more?
have more than one to go through?
I could, you know, do quick two that would sort of be quick. Like one I want to do quickly and one I want to do a little bit more about, but so let
Proceed,
me,
proceed.
okay. So one I want to do, which I've I really like this house. It's an interesting house, and I think you may have smelled this, but the brand is called Utopi.
Hmm.
And this is it's a bit off the radar for some,
I've never
and
even heard of it now.
yeah, it's a very interesting house. They just give their fragrances numbers, and this one is number 8. And let me just spray this one. They are they are in France, but I'm yeah, this is a really interesting one. This is extremely aromatic, and it's very dry. Um, but I am going to pull this up a bit because I do want to kind of look at a bit of the ingredients in it. But it's very woodsy, and I think that's where I, you know, this yeah, yeah, sorry. Thank goodness for the wonder of Fragrantica, right? And like,
The database is
um,
so useful. Yeah,
I know, and every time I talk to people, they're like, "Oh, I love your database so much." Da, da, da. But what is
we're not just saying that too. We just
yeah,
it,
it
it
just
saves
literally is.
ourselves
Yeah.
too when we're writing or talking about things. It's nice to have it there.
Yeah. So what? Yeah. There's a interesting. There's two interesting things about this, and one is it's extremely aromatic, and it uses so there's musk in the base, which I think kind of helps establish its you know fougere-ness. Very aromatic, and it uses three interesting components, and one galbanum is one of them, which is curious for its use in a fougere, because that galbanum for me is always you know, it's that tricky green note that some people really like, some don't like. It's you know, kind of leans almost towards the celery type smell. I've seen it paired with flowers sometimes. In this case, there's also some neroli in here, which is more like a classic cologne. You know, neroli is often used in a cologne, but so musk, galbanum, mint leaves, a bit of lentisk or mastic, that very almost piney, gummy type smell, and a bit of citrus on the top. But it's wow, it's still got that central core of that aromatic musk, just the barest hint of sweetness to it. But it's so foresty, it's crazy, and very wearably foresty.
I've made a deal with myself that if anything contains lentisk or mastic, as it's also referred to,
Mhm.
or the note of styrax, I'm going to check it out. So two
Oh, there we
very
go. Okay, perfect,
promising
perfect.
notes, and you said that has a muskiness, and styrax is very musky.
Yeah,
So Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious to check this out now. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you absolutely should do so. Anyone who likes, yeah, who likes lentisca or mastica or whatever, this is a good example of that, of use of that, and also just the aromatics in it are great. And then for my very last, quickly, there was a choice I had between two, and this is something that I think you and I may have talked about together, but this is, I'm going to mention this one because I think people know I'm actually quite a big fan of Santa Maria Novella, and they have a lot of great scents. And, you know, some of these actually, I think, the formulas predate the notion of the fougere. So it's kind of, you know, because some of them are supposedly quite ancient, I think from like, you know, 17th century or something. So, but this is the one called Potpourri, which is very, the name's a little misleading because I remember thinking when I saw the, excuse me, when I saw the bottle, I thought, well, what's that going to smell like? You know, that, you know, some dried rose petals kind of a thing, you know, and it's actually, it's primarily the smell of bay leaves. It's a,
Oh,
yeah, it is extraordinarily, almost medicinally aromatic.
that's right
Beautifully
up my alley.
aromatic.
Yeah, I cannot wait to smell this. This whole
Yeah.
line has evaded me thus far, and I need to check it out.
Yeah, it has, pardon me, it has some, and they labeled their bottles on the bottom, so it's a little in the back, and it's usually just frosted. But so this one, Potpourri, is you know, I guess one could say it's very much in sort of the traditional masculine camp, you know, if we want to go there. And this is from the stuff you were mentioning in the beginning about fragrances that tend to fit in that, you know, medicinal, almost wellness, slightly pharmaceutical aspect, and all of that. This is very much that mentholic, spicy, feel better. You know, this is something you would ritualistically put on after you have shaved, gotten bathed, and you want to almost protect yourself. Like this would be that smell. Beautiful aromatic, and I distinctly would call this a fougere. It's got a real fougere. I don't even, I almost don't even want to know exactly what's in it because it's a fougere. Darn it, you know, I'm gonna just claim it a fougere. I don't care if it follows it or not.
So saith the Bible.
Yes. So that's for me. So that takes care of me.
Okay, well, so I wanted to bring up my final choice.
Sure.
And so I'm sorry if this makes you uncomfortable. We don't have to do it, John.
No,
But
okay.
when I
What's
thought
that?
of uncommon fougères, I couldn't help but think of Eider Antler, your
Oh
very
my
own creation.
goodness. Oh wow. Oh, jeepers.
Well,
Oh,
okay.
that's, I mean, thanks for bringing, I mean, that's kind to bring up for me.
Well, no, so again, I don't. You and I are friends, and I don't
Right.
want people watching to think like, oh, he's only bringing it up to give John's brand some help. But no,
No.
John's brand doesn't
I-
need any help, folks.
No, I
January
appreciate
Scent
that.
Project, Eider Antler. I'm not going to describe it because it'd be a little bit like, oh, I smell this, that, and the other thing, and John's like, yeah, I know, I may. But I guess my point bringing it up is when you were making this, John, did you think about I want to make a fougere, or was it a little bit more subconscious than that?
No, it absolutely was about making a fougere. And I'm glad you asked the question because that's why I think fougeres are a little close to my heart, because when we were talking a little about the alchemy of a fougere, I was specifically studying, well, what makes a fougere? And I did kind of go through these points you mentioned about, you know, the various parts that can kind of come together. And I remember a very funny moment when I was looking through some formulas around where, you know, different sort of things that you could find online and in a few books. And I did compose a few sort of for study purposes to begin. And there was a moment where I just made something, and it was literally Old Spice. It was Old Spice, and I just created Old Spice. I know how they make Old Spice now, and which is considered a classic, fougere with a little bit of rose in it, right? And but it was such a beautiful moment, because that's the alchemy. It was like that perfect mixture of a few things, and then I really understood, wow, this is about proportions. And then from there I started to riff and change and to add and subtract. And I think what I learned so much about that experience is just how you can retain that notion of the fougere by making certain adjustments in one direction or another. And then sometimes I think I went too far afield, and I'm like, I don't know, this may not actually be fougere anymore, and I'm not sure I like that. So yeah, it was very deliberately a fougere, and it was a great learning experience for me. And I really liked seeing how far I could push that idea. It really did.
Well, I definitely get this association from it of it being very ivy centric,
Yes.
like or when I think about herbs too, I don't necessarily think of this as highly herbaceous in the same way other herbaceous scents are.
Yeah.
But I definitely get that sense of, you know, how some herbs, whether they're more wild or weedy, or whether they're something like you'd get for a kitchen, like your marjorams, your thyme. You know how
Hmm.
fresh herbs still on the vine have like an almost soft outer layer to them
Hmm.
sometimes.
Yeah.
I
Right. Hmm.
associate eider antler with the sense of that pillowy softness of an herb,
Ah, that's
right? Like
interesting.
that
Yeah.
cashmere quality. Although
Right.
you have listed cashmere woods or cashmere
Hmm.
qualities in your own, you know, description of this note in the note list. So I'm kind of curious
Right.
where that notion came in, because you don't really tend to associate materials like cashmere and or notes like cashmere woods or cashmere scarves, that kind of thing, with the
Hmm.
fougere genre. So again, it's kind of like, to me, it's
Yeah.
kind of coming off as that buttoned up versus wild nature contrast.
So interesting you make that notion, because it's something I hadn't thought about specifically, but now when like hearing you say it, it's like, well, it's really a great observation to make. I know that one one of the one of the sort of trials that I did when I was sort of working on this is I went very mossy and very almost damp, and it got way too damp. But what was interesting about going in that direction for a little while when I was working on the formula was there was a I noticed that the dampness or dryness of something really changed the feel of it. And when I did sort of add in some elements that made it go very damp, I retained just a tiny bit of that sensation in there, and not more in the sense that I liked the notion of maybe like, and it's hard to say how this duplicates itself into smell, but that notion of like dewiness on the grass, or like
Mm.
fresh, how you might see things in nature in the morning as opposed to like at night. And I think that quality might be ascertained in that way that you're talking about through something like cashmere, and that sort of velvety quality of like certain herbs or things that are still growing and not necessarily dried and cut up in that very aromatic way that you'd find in a kitchen or something. So I definitely think of these things as being alive, like you're saying, like they're fresh things that are still, yes, that's a great
That's
observation. Yeah.
really interesting to talk about too, because yeah, when I said it isn't herbaceous in the same way I would associate with other herbaceous scents, is that's because when we encounter herbs, they're typically either dried and processed, or they're freshly chopped, you know, in the kitchen.
Yeah,
And when you
right.
process or treat an herb, you are releasing its essential oils, you are bruising its cell walls, and you're getting a
Yep.
very different smell than you would smell if it's still on the vine. And
Yeah.
so to me, eider antler is of the vine, if you will, which I'm
Oh,
sure is
cool,
a
cool.
nice little marketing tagline you can use in the future.
Of the fine,
Of the
courtesy
vine.
of Adam
Fougere
Forciati.
of the vine, courtesy A Forziati. Yeah, I
Right,
love it.
exactly.
Glad I could provide that service.
Thank you.
Um,
No, I
okay, well
appreciate that
that's
though.
brilliant. I guess I wanted
Yeah,
to end things then with you know, maybe just a quick question for you.
yeah.
What do you want to see in a fougere? What is a type of fougere that hasn't been created yet that you would like to see? I know what my answer would be, but I'm kind of
Ooh.
curious what you would
Yeah,
say.
yeah. I mean, I'm really curious to hear your answer. So That's a really good one. First off, like just want to say this has been a great conversation because I realize how much I love this genre, and that I feel like there's lots of room to play in this playground, which is just such an awesome concept, right? I would like to see this is interesting, but I haven't actually seen too many people try to pull in some interesting flowers into fougeres, and that's one idea. And it may be the problem that might happen there is that the fougere just becomes so secondary to the floral notes that it may just get lost, right? So that's one. I think, though, more importantly, when I smell something like the Fougere Bengal from Parfum d'Empire, I'm so interested in that idea of it going a little bit darker, and actually really turning up the tonka bean and the amber part of it. So I guess I'd love to see a fougere that really I don't know, pumped up an unusual dark element, like what about a chocolate fougere, or or a I don't know, like a cacao fougere, or like even like, this is going to sound weird, but sort of like a like a cooked pumpkin fougere or something, uh, some interesting things there that could definitely happen there with darker elements in a fougere. I'd love to see something like that.
Well, you've basically stolen what I was going to say.
No, no,
Oh no,
please go. No, please.
separately,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
would say
yeah.
a floral fougere that somehow makes that work. I'd love to see it. I would think gardenia would be a good place to start.
Whoa. Okay, that's cool. That's actually very cool, and that I could actually see that working, because
Spice your element.
gardenias. Yeah, totally. And it's also such an odd flower, right? It's people are a little afraid to use it in perfumes, I think, because it's so, it tends to steal the show. So if you could manage to weave that into that would be wow, that would
Also,
be such an interesting, for
you know,
sure.
jasmine and juniper would probably go very well together. So maybe
Hmm.
it could work. But no, I think
Yeah.
I think gardenia fougere is where it's at. Giving you some
Mm.
ideas, giving any perfumer watching it some
Right.
ideas.
You could I'd love to see if you want to play around and make yourself a
Oh man, I
gardenia
do
for
actually.
sure.
Now that you mention it, that would be a very fun
Oof,
challenge.
that would be a great
The
challenge.
the other thing I'd like to see in a fougere though
Mhm.
would be kind of like you said, like that darker. I would go so far as to say a nutty kind of fougere, like a
Mm.
coffee, but not
Mhm.
sweetened cream coffee. I'm talking like coffee grounds and fougere. Something that,
Mm.
like you
Mm.
said, that cooked pumpkin uh, complexity of notes where you have your breaded darker elements. That would be a really interesting fougere, a coffee nutty
Mm.
but not sweet fougere.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I could see that. And I could also see how that would expand the possibilities a lot. Something like that. Yeah. That would be cool.
So now that we've successfully deconstructed the fougere category, John, I wanted to say thanks for talking to me about it. I think we've probably rambled
Yeah.
on for quite long enough, but um, yeah, this has been awesome. I really would
Yeah.
like to do this for another category with you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely the same here. This has been a great ramble, though, and I've learned quite a bit from your perspective. Thank you for your thoughts on this, and very much enjoyed it. And let's even revisit the Fougere like a year from now or something, and see
Okay,
if we.
Fougere part two. I hope anybody
Yeah,
watching who's enjoyed this might leave a comment or a suggestion about
I would
what
love
they'd
that.
like to see in a Fougere discussion. If there's a specific type or subgenre you'd like us to dive into, we can do that.
Yeah, and I'd also love to see some recommendations of interesting Fougeres that that we're unaware of that we should explore, because I'd love to find out about them. That would be great. Thank you as well, Adam. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Likewise, thank you.
Yeah.